A cold gust of wind swept through the desolate streets of Miles City, Montana Territory, as Tabitha Foster clutched her shawl tighter around her swollen belly, her eyes scanning the darkening horizon with increasing desperation. The year was 1879, and at 23 years old, Tabitha had already known more sorrow than most would experience in a lifetime. "Please," she whispered to the imposing man blocking the doorway of the town's only hotel. "I can work. I can clean or cook. I just need somewhere to sleep tonight." The hotel manager's eyes traveled from her face to her protruding stomach, then to the simple gold band on her finger. His lips curled into a sneer. "We don't take in your kind here, madam. Husband dead, is he? Or did he run off when he found out about the little one? Either way, we run a respectable establishment." Tabitha swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. It had been the same at every establishment in Miles City: suspicion, judgment, and ultimately rejection. 6 months pregnant and 3 weeks a widow, she had traveled as far as her meager savings would take her, only to find herself stranded in this unforgiving town. "My husband died in a mining accident," she said, her voice wavering. But I'm trying to reach my cousin in Helena." "Well, you won't be reaching her tonight, not from my hotel," he replied, already closing the door. "Try the church. Maybe the good Lord will take pity on you." The door shut with a resounding thud, leaving Tabitha alone in the gathering darkness. She placed a protective hand over her stomach as the baby kicked, a reminder that she wasn't truly alone. Michael's child was depending on her to survive. The church, like the boarding house and 2 saloons before it, had also turned her away. The pastor's wife had been particularly cruel, suggesting that Tabitha's condition was the result of sin rather than a loving marriage cut tragically short. The temperature was dropping rapidly as night fell. October in Montana Territory was unforgiving, and snow would not be far off. With nowhere else to turn, Tabitha made her way to the edge of town, where a small stable stood adjacent to a modest cabin. Perhaps she could find shelter among the horses for the night. It wouldn't be the first time she'd slept in a stable since Michael's death. As she approached the wooden structure, a tall figure emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand. "Who's there?" called a deep, cautious voice. Tabitha froze, her hands instinctively covering her stomach. "I mean no harm," she called back, her voice thin with exhaustion. "I'm just looking for somewhere to rest for the night." The figure approached, and in the dim light from the cabin windows, Tabitha could make out the features of a man in his late 20s with a weathered face that spoke of long days under the harsh Montana sun. His eyes, keen and assessing, took in her condition with a single glance. "You shouldn't be out in this cold," he said, lowering his rifle. "Where's your husband?" "Dead," Tabitha answered simply, too tired for lengthy explanations. "I've tried everywhere in town, but no one will take me in." The man was silent for a long moment, studying her with an unreadable expression. Then he nodded toward the cabin. "I'm Kieran Ironwood," he said. "Come inside before you freeze." Relief flooded through Tabitha, making her legs weak. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'm Tabitha Foster." The interior of the cabin was modest but warm. A small fire crackled in the hearth, and the room was sparsely furnished with a table, 2 chairs, and a single bed in the corner. Hunting rifles hung on the wall alongside a few tools of the ranching trade. "It's not much," Kieran said, setting his rifle aside and gesturing to the only chair at the table. "But it's warm." "It's more than I could have hoped for," Tabitha said sincerely, sinking gratefully into the offered seat. Kieran moved around the small cabin with purpose, stoking the fire and setting a kettle to boil. "When did you last eat, Mrs. Foster?" The question caught Tabitha off guard. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple kindness that she found herself momentarily unable to answer. "This morning," she finally managed. "I had some bread." Kieran nodded, then pulled some dried beef, beans, and cornmeal from his stores. "It's not fancy, but it'll fill you up." As he prepared the simple meal, Tabitha took in her surroundings more carefully. The cabin was tidy, if utilitarian. A cowboy's life was evident in every corner, from the saddle, propped against the wall, to the work-worn leather gloves on the table. But there were small touches that spoke of something more. A shelf of books beside the bed, a hand-carved wooden horse on the windowsill, a quilt that looked handmade rather than purchased. "Are you from Miles City, Mr. Ironwood?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Call me Kieran," he replied, stirring the pot of beans. No, I'm not. Came out from Pennsylvania about 5 years ago. Worked as a ranch hand for the Circle M for a while, then saved enough to buy this little piece of land. I break horses for the ranchers around these parts now. A horse trainer, Tabitha said with a small smile. My father raised horses in Ohio before he passed. Something shifted in Kieran's expression, a softening around the eyes. Is that where you're from, Ohio? Tabitha nodded. A small town called Liberty. After my parents died, I married Michael Foster. He heard there was good money in the mines out west. Her voice faltered. We were going to build a life here. Kieran set a bowl of steaming beans and beef before her, along with a piece of cornbread. Eat, he said gently. Then you can take the bed. I'll sleep in the stable tonight. Tabitha looked up sharply. I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, Kieran interrupted. You're in no condition to argue, Mrs. Foster. That baby needs you rested and warm. Something about his tone brooked no argument, and Tabitha found herself nodding in acquiescence. The food was simple but delicious, and she hadn't realized how hungry she truly was until the first bite touched her tongue. As she ate, Kieran moved about the cabin, gathering blankets and his coat. Where are you headed? He asked. Helena, Tabitha replied between bites. My cousin Sarah lives there with her husband. She's the only family I have left. Kieran nodded thoughtfully. That's nearly 100 miles from here. How are you planning to get there? The question hung in the air, highlighting the precariousness of her situation. I had hoped to find work here, save enough for the stagecoach fare. Not much work to be had for a woman in your condition, Kieran observed, though there was no judgment in his voice, only a pragmatic assessment of the reality she faced. I'm stronger than I look, Tabitha said with a flash of determination. And I'm good with numbers. I was hoping for work as a shopkeeper's assistant or perhaps helping at the hotel. Kieran's mouth twisted in a wry smile. I take it that didn't go well. No, she admitted. It seems Miles City has no use for a pregnant widow. Kieran watched her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. Finish your supper and get some rest. We can figure out the next steps tomorrow. With that, he gathered the last of his things and headed for the door. Mr. Ironwood, Kieran, Tabitha called after him. He turned, his hand on the door latch. Thank you, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't. Get some rest, Mrs. Foster, he said quietly. You're safe here. As the door closed behind him, Tabitha felt the weight of the day's fear and exhaustion crash down upon her. The bed, when she finally crawled into it, was simple but clean, with sheets that smelled of soap and fresh air. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the cabin, the fire crackled warmly. For the first time since Michael's death, Tabitha fell asleep without fear gnawing at her heart. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. Tabitha woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous evening came rushing back. She sat up slowly, her hand automatically going to her belly where the baby was stirring. The cabin door opened and Kieran entered with an armful of firewood. He stopped short when he saw her awake. Good morning, he said, his voice gruff with the chill of the morning. Hope you slept well. Better than I have in weeks, Tabitha admitted, smoothing her tangled hair self-consciously. Thank you again for your kindness. Kieran nodded and set about rekindling the fire that had died down overnight. His movements were efficient, those of a man accustomed to caring for himself. There's water in the basin if you'd like to wash, he said, not looking up from his task. I'll make coffee and breakfast once I get this going. Tabitha rose carefully and made her way to the small wash basin. The cold water was bracing but welcome, and she did her best to make herself presentable with the limited resources available. Her dress, once a cheerful blue calico, was travel-worn and dusty, but it was the only one she had that still accommodated her growing belly. By the time she finished, Kieran had the fire blazing and coffee brewing on the stove. The aroma filled the small cabin, making Tabitha realize how long it had been since she'd had a proper cup of coffee. I'm afraid I don't have much to offer for breakfast, Kieran said, cracking eggs into a cast iron skillet. Eggs and a bit of salt pork is about it. That sounds wonderful, Tabitha said sincerely. I don't want to impose on your supplies, though. I should try to find work in town today. Kieran glanced at her over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. About that, he said slowly, I've been thinking. The stage coach to Helena doesn't come through for another 2 weeks. Even if you found work today, you wouldn't earn enough for the fare by then. Tabitha's heart sank. 2 more weeks in Miles City, a town that had already made it clear she wasn't welcome. I see, she said, trying to keep the despair from her voice. Perhaps I could find a way to earn the fare more quickly. Kieran set a plate of eggs and pork before her, then poured coffee into a chipped but clean mug. He sat across from her with his own plate, his movements deliberate as if choosing his next words carefully. I have another suggestion, he said finally. I'm heading to Helena myself in 3 days, taking some horses to a buyer there. You could come along. I have a wagon. It wouldn't be the most comfortable journey, but it would get you to your cousin. Tabitha stared at him, speechless. The offer was so unexpected, so generous that she couldn't immediately find the words to respond. Why would you do that? She asked when she finally found her voice. You don't know me. Kieran's gaze was steady. Because it's the right thing to do, and because I know what it's like to be alone in a strange place. There was something in his voice, a hint of old pain that resonated with Tabitha's own grief. She studied him more carefully, this tall, solitary cowboy who had opened his home to a desperate stranger. I can pay you, she offered. Not much, but what I have. Keep your money, he interrupted. You'll need it once you reach Helena. Tabitha's eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. I don't know how to thank you. Kieran looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. No need for thanks, just finish your breakfast before it gets cold. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of forks against plates and the crackle of the fire. Tabitha's mind raced, weighing her limited options. Traveling alone with a man she barely knew carried its own risks, but Kieran Ironwood had shown her nothing but respect and kindness. If you're sure it wouldn't be an imposition, she said finally, I would be grateful for the ride to Helena. Kieran nodded once decisively. It's settled then. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay here. I'll sleep in the stable until we leave. I can't put you out of your home for 3 days, Tabitha protested. It's no hardship, he assured her. I've slept in worse places. Tabitha wanted to argue further but could see the determination in his face. This was a man accustomed to making decisions and standing by them. Then I insist on earning my keep, she said firmly. I can cook and clean, mend clothes, whatever would be helpful. A ghost of a smile touched Kieran's lips. If you're determined to help, I won't stop you. Truth be told, this place could use a woman's touch. After breakfast, Kieran went out to tend to his horses and prepare for the upcoming journey. Left alone in the cabin, Tabitha set about making herself useful. Despite her condition, she was no stranger to hard work, and the simple act of sweeping the floor, washing the dishes, and putting things in order gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since Michael's death. She found a small basket of mending that Kieran had apparently set aside and tackled it with the needle and thread from her small travel bag. His shirts were well worn but of good quality, and she took care with each repair, grateful for the chance to repay even a small portion of his kindness. Outside, she could hear him moving about, speaking occasionally to his horses in low, soothing tones. There was something comforting about the sounds of life going on around her, so different from the lonely silence of the past weeks. Around midday, Kieran returned to the cabin, bringing with him the scent of hay and horses. He stopped short in the doorway, taking in the transformed space, the swept floor, the organized shelves, his mended shirts laid neatly on the bed. You didn't have to do all this, he said, but there was appreciation in his voice. I wanted to, Tabitha replied. It gave me something to focus on besides my troubles. Kieran nodded in understanding. I need to go into town for supplies before our journey. Is there anything you need? Tabitha shook her head. I have everything I need in my bag. It wasn't entirely true there were many things she needed but couldn't afford, but she wouldn't ask more of this man who had already offered so much. Kieran seemed to read the truth in her face. I'll be back in a few hours, he said simply, and departed without further comment. Left alone once more, Tabitha found herself drawn to the small bookshelf beside Kieran's bed. She ran her fingers along the spines, surprised at the eclectic collection, a Bible, of course, but also works by Dickens, Twain, Cooper, and even a volume of poetry by Tennyson. These were not the books she would have expected from a rough-hewn horse trainer. She selected the Tennyson, remembering how her father had read poetry aloud on winter evenings and settled in the chair by the fire. Reading had always been her escape, and now, more than ever, she needed to be transported away from her circumstances, if only for a little while. The afternoon slipped away as she lost herself in the rhythm of the verses. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Kieran's return until the door opened, letting in a gust of cold air. He carried several packages wrapped in brown paper, which he set on the table. "Hope you weren't too lonely," he said, removing his hat and coat. "Not at all," Tabitha replied, holding up the book. "I hope you don't mind. I love Tennyson." Something like surprise flickered across Kieran's face. "My mother loved poetry," he said after a moment. "She taught me to read with those books." There was a wealth of emotion in those simple sentences, and Tabitha sensed a story behind them, but Kieran had already turned away, unwrapping his packages. "I picked up some things for the journey," he explained, revealing foodstuffs, a small sack of coffee, and a thick woolen blanket. "And this," he added, setting aside a small parcel, "is for you." Tabitha looked up in surprise. "For me?" "But it's nothing fancy," Kieran said, a hint of color touching his weathered cheeks. "Just something I thought you might need." Hesitantly, Tabitha unwrapped the parcel to find a simple but warm shawl, much thicker than the thin one she currently wore. "Montana nights get cold," Kieran said by way of explanation. "Especially this time of year." Tabitha's throat tightened with emotion. Such a small kindness, yet it meant everything to her in that moment, a reminder that not everyone in the world was as callous as those who had turned her away. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's perfect." Kieran nodded, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude, and busied himself storing the supplies. "I thought we might leave early the day after tomorrow," he said, changing the subject. "If the weather holds, we can make good time." "It's about 4 days to Helena at a steady pace." "That sounds sensible," Tabitha agreed, still clutching the shawl. "I'd like to help with the preparations however I can." "You can help by taking care of yourself," Kieran said firmly. "That little one needs you strong for the journey." His concern for her unborn child touched Tabitha deeply. Since Michael's death, no one had shown any interest in her baby's well-being. "Do you have children, Kieran?" she asked impulsively, then immediately regretted the personal question when his expression shuddered. "No," he said shortly. "Never married." An awkward silence fell between them, which Kieran broke by suggesting they have an early supper. Tabitha seized the opportunity to change the subject, offering to cook the meal while he finished his outdoor chores. That evening, they shared a simple but hearty stew that Tabitha prepared from the supplies Kieran had purchased. As they ate, a tentative companionship began to form between them, the initial awkwardness giving way to cautious conversation. Kieran told her about his work breaking horses, explaining the patience and understanding required to gain an animal's trust. Tabitha, in turn, shared stories of her father's horse farm in Ohio and the happy childhood she'd had there before illness took both her parents within a year of each other. "That's when I met Michael," she explained, her voice softening at the memory. "He was passing through Liberty working as a journeyman carpenter. He was kind and steady, and he offered me a future when I had none." "He sounds like a good man," Kieran said quietly. "He was," Tabitha agreed, her hand going to her belly. "He was so excited about the baby. He had such dreams for us out here in the West." "Dreams have a way of changing," Kieran observed, his gaze distant, "but new ones can take their place." There was wisdom in his words, and Tabitha found herself wondering about the dreams Kieran Ironwood had once held, and what had shaped him into the solitary man who would give his bed to a stranger in need. As night fell, Kieran once again prepared to sleep in the stable, despite Tabitha's protests. "I've slept under the stars more nights than I can count," he assured her. "A stable with a roof and horses for warmth is luxury by comparison." Before leaving, he built up the fire to last through the night and made sure she had everything she needed. There was something both touching and sad about his careful solicitude, as if he was unaccustomed to caring for anyone but himself, yet did so with an innate thoughtfulness. "Sleep well, Mrs. Foster," he said, pausing at the door. "Tabitha," she corrected gently. "Please call me Tabitha." A small smile touched his lips. "Tabitha then, good night." After he left, Tabitha wrapped herself in the new shawl and sat by the fire, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, she had been desperate and alone, facing a future that seemed impossibly bleak. Now, though still uncertain, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon: a cousin in Helena, a safe passage to reach her, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who asked nothing in return. As she finally lay down to sleep, Tabitha offered a silent prayer of thanks for Kieran Ironwood, the cowboy who had given her his bed and slept outside in the cold Montana night. The next day was spent in earnest preparation for the journey. Kieran brought the wagon around to the front of the cabin and began loading it with the supplies they would need for 4 days on the road. Tabitha helped where she could, sorting foodstuffs and packing bedding, though Kieran insisted she avoid any heavy lifting. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested when he took a sack of cornmeal from her hands. Kieran's expression was serious. "My mother lost 2 babies before I was born," he said simply. "I learned early that women carrying children should be treated with care." The personal revelation, offered so matter-of-factly, silenced Tabitha's objections. It was the first real glimpse he had given her of his past, and she sensed it wasn't information he shared lightly. Throughout the day, they worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm that belied their brief acquaintance. Kieran was a methodical man who approached each task with care and forethought, and Tabitha found herself admiring his calm efficiency. As the sun began to set, the wagon stood ready, loaded with their supplies and 3 horses, 2 to pull and 1 that Kieran was delivering to his buyer in Helena. "We'll leave at first light," Kieran said, surveying their work with satisfaction. "The sooner we start, the farther we'll get before nightfall." That evening they shared another simple meal, but the atmosphere between them had shifted subtly. No longer were they strangers thrust together by circumstance. A tentative friendship had begun to form, built on shared work and quiet conversations. After supper, Kieran surprised her by pulling out a harmonica from his pocket. "Do you mind?" he asked, almost shyly. "Playing helps me think." "Please," Tabitha encouraged him. "I'd love to hear it." The mournful, sweet notes filled the cabin as Kieran played a melody Tabitha didn't recognize. There was something achingly beautiful about the simple tune and about the image of this solitary man finding solace in music. When he finished, Tabitha found herself blinking back unexpected tears. "That was lovely," she said softly. "What is it called?" "Just something I made up," Kieran admitted, tucking the harmonica away. "Music keeps me company on long nights." "You must get lonely out here," Tabitha observed, then regretted the personal comment when Kieran's expression became guarded. "I'm used to my own company," he said, rising from his seat. "I should get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." As he gathered his things to head out to the stable, Tabitha caught his arm impulsively. "Kieran," she said, "I want you to know how much your kindness has meant to me. When I arrived in Miles City, I thought all humanity had left the world. You've reminded me that good people still exist." Kieran looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face. Something complicated moved in his eyes, discomfort at her praise, perhaps, but something else too, something warmer. "Anyone would have done the same," he said gruffly. "No," Tabitha said firmly, "they wouldn't. I know because I tried every door in town before yours." Kieran held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once, acknowledging the truth of her words. "Get some rest, Tabitha. Dawn comes early." After he left, Tabitha remained by the fire, her thoughts in turmoil. In just 2 days, this quiet cowboy had become important to her in a way she hadn't expected. Not merely as a benefactor or even as a friend, but as something more, a connection she couldn't quite define but felt deeply nonetheless. The realization troubled her. Michael had been dead less than a month. Her grief for him was still raw, her love for him still strong. It seemed impossible, even disloyal, to feel anything for another man so soon. Yet as she finally lay down to sleep, it was Kieran's face that lingered in her mind, those keen eyes that saw so much, that quiet strength that asked for nothing yet gave without hesitation. Dawn broke clear and cold the next morning. Tabitha woke to the sound of movement outside and dressed quickly, eager to begin the journey that would take her to safety and a new beginning. When she emerged from the cabin, Kieran was already harnessing the horses to the wagon, his breath visible in the chilly morning air. "Good morning," he greeted her, his voice rough with the early hour. "There's coffee on the stove if you want some before we go." Tabitha hurried back inside, grateful for the thoughtfulness. The hot coffee warmed her from within, fortifying her for the journey ahead. She gathered her few belongings and took a last look around the cabin that had been her sanctuary for these brief days. Outside, Kieran helped her climb onto the wagon seat, his hand strong and steady on her arm. The wagon itself was utilitarian, but had been prepared with care for her comfort, the seat padded with a folded blanket, another blanket ready for additional warmth, and a small footstool positioned so her feet wouldn't dangle. "I'm not much for luxury travel," Kieran said, noticing her surveying the arrangements, "but I tried to make it as comfortable as possible." "It's perfect," Tabitha assured him, touched by his consideration. With a flick of the reins, they set off, leaving behind the small cabin that had provided such unexpected sanctuary. As they passed through Miles City, Tabitha kept her head high, refusing to feel shame before the people who had turned her away in her hour of need. A few curious glances followed their progress, but Kieran's presence beside her acted as a shield against judgment. Once they were beyond the town limits, the vast Montana landscape opened before them, rolling hills giving way to distant mountains, the October sun casting long shadows across the land. Despite the circumstances that had brought her to this moment, Tabitha couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the wild beauty surrounding them. "It's magnificent," she said softly. Kieran glanced at her, a small smile touching his lips. "That it is. It's what keeps me here, even when the winters are harsh and the living is hard. There's a freedom in this land you can't find back east." Michael felt the same way, Tabitha said. He used to say the West was where a man could build something of his own without the weight of the past holding him down. "Your husband was right about that," Kieran agreed. "Out here, it's what you do that matters, not where you came from." There was something personal in his tone that made Tabitha wonder again about his history. "Is that why you came west? To leave something behind?" Kieran was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "My father was a steel mill worker in Pittsburgh, worked himself to the bone for the company, then died when a furnace exploded. The company gave my mother $20 for his death and told her to vacate the company housing within the week." His hands tightened on the reins. "I was 17. Watched my mother work herself to death doing laundry for the same men who had discarded my father like a broken tool. After she died, there was nothing holding me there." The pain in his voice, though controlled, was palpable. Tabitha found herself reaching out, placing her hand gently on his arm. "I'm so sorry, Kieran," he nodded once, acknowledgement rather than acceptance. "It was a long time ago, but yes, I came west to build something that was mine alone, something no company or boss could take away from me." "And you have," Tabitha said. "Your land, your horses, your reputation as a trainer, you've built something to be proud of." A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "It's a start." They fell into companionable silence as the wagon rumbled along the trail. The day warmed gradually, though the October air remained crisp. Around midday, they stopped beside a small stream to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky, bread, and apples. Tabitha stretched her legs, grateful for the break from the constant jostling of the wagon. The baby seemed particularly active today, tumbling and kicking as if excited by the journey. "Everything all right?" Kieran asked, noticing her hand on her belly. "Just someone making their presence known," Tabitha said with a small smile. "Would you like to feel? He's quite active right now." The question clearly caught Kieran off guard. He hesitated, then nodded, approaching her with an almost reverent caution. Tabitha took his hand and placed it on the side of her stomach where the baby was kicking most vigorously. For a moment, nothing happened, then a solid thump against his palm made Kieran's eyes widen in wonder. "That's quite something," he said softly, his usual reserve momentarily forgotten. "Michael used to say he was practicing to be a blacksmith," Tabitha said, the memory bittersweet. "He was so certain it would be a boy." "And what do you think?" Kieran asked, reluctantly withdrawing his hand. Tabitha considered the question. "I think it doesn't matter as long as they're healthy, but sometimes I feel like it's a girl, strong-willed and determined." "Like her mother," Kieran observed quietly. The comment, delivered so naturally, caught Tabitha by surprise. "You think I'm strong-willed?" Kieran's gaze was steady. "I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met, to face what you have and still hold your head high. That takes courage beyond measure." The simple sincerity of his words touched Tabitha deeply. For so long she had been merely surviving, putting one foot before the other because there was no alternative. To have someone recognize the strength that took was unexpectedly validating. "Thank you," she said softly. "Though I think true courage is found in kindness, like what you've shown me." A flush of color touched Kieran's weathered cheeks, and he turned away, busying himself with checking the horses' harnesses. "We should get moving if we want to make it to the creek by nightfall. It's a good place to camp sheltered, with fresh water." They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they left the plains behind and entered more rugged terrain. Kieran pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his travels through the territory, revealing a deep knowledge of and respect for the land. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, they reached the creek Kieran had mentioned, a clear, swift-running stream bordered by cottonwood trees that provided natural shelter. "We'll camp here for the night," Kieran said, bringing the wagon to a halt in a small clearing. "It's protected from the wind, and the trees will hide our fire from anyone passing by." Though Tabitha hadn't considered the possibility of danger, the reminder that they were in wild country, where outlaws and hostile elements might pose a threat, was sobering. "Are there many bandits in these parts?" she asked as Kieran helped her down from the wagon. "Not many, but enough to be cautious," he replied, his expression serious. "Most folks out here are decent, just trying to make their way like anyone else. But there are always those who'd rather take than earn." Kieran set about making camp with practiced efficiency, unhitching the horses, gathering wood for a fire, and unloading only what they would need for the night. Tabitha helped where she could, determined not to be a burden despite her condition. As darkness fell, they sat beside the small fire Kieran had built, eating a simple supper of beans, bacon, and biscuits. The night was clear, with stars spreading across the sky in a dazzling display that took Tabitha's breath away. "It's like diamonds on black velvet," she murmured, gazing upward. Kieran followed her gaze. "The stars seem closer out here, don't they? Less distant than back east." "Yes," Tabitha agreed, "as if you could reach up and touch them." They sat in companionable silence, the crackling of the fire and the gentle rushing of the creek the only sounds. There was something intimately peaceful about sharing this moment with Kieran, something that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Will you tell me about your cousin in Helena?" Kieran asked after a while. "The one you're going to stay with?" Tabitha smiled at the thought of her cousin. "Sarah is my father's sister's daughter. We grew up together in Ohio. She married John Carlson 5 years ago and moved out west when he got a position with the territorial government. They have 2 children now, Emma and David, and they're expecting you." "They don't know I'm coming," Tabitha admitted. "After Michael died, I wrote to Sarah, but I don't know if my letter reached her. Post is unreliable to the mining camps." Kieran frowned slightly. "So you're not certain they'll take you in?" "Sarah will," Tabitha said with confidence. "We were like sisters growing up. She'll help me until I can get on my feet again." Kieran nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely reassured. "Well, I won't leave Helena until I know you're settled safely." The promise warmed Tabitha's heart. "You've already done more than enough, Kieran. I can't ask for more." "You're not asking," he said simply. "I'm offering." Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that went beyond words. In that moment, Tabitha realized that Kieran Ironwood had become more than a benefactor or even a friend. He had become someone she cared for deeply, someone whose presence in her life mattered. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. "We should get some sleep," Kieran said, breaking the moment. "I've made you a bed in the wagon. It'll be more comfortable than the ground." He had indeed transformed a section of the wagon bed into a cozy nest, using blankets and his own bedroll to create a surprisingly comfortable-looking pallet. "Where will you sleep?" Tabitha asked, though she already knew the answer. "By the fire," Kieran replied. "I'm used to sleeping rough." "You always seem to be giving up your bed for me," Tabitha observed with a small smile. Kieran's expression softened. "It's no hardship, Tabitha. I sleep better knowing you're comfortable." There was tenderness in his voice that made Tabitha's heart beat faster. She found herself wondering what it would be like to share a life with a man like Kieran Ironwood, a man of quiet strength and unwavering principle, whose kindness came not from weakness, but from a deep wellspring of character. But such thoughts were premature, perhaps even foolish. She barely knew him, and her heart was still raw from Michael's death. Whatever feelings might be growing between them, now was not the time to examine them too closely. "Good night, Kieran," she said softly, "and thank you for everything." "Sleep well, Tabitha," he replied. "Tomorrow we'll be that much closer to Helena." As she settled into the makeshift bed, Tabitha could see Kieran through the open end of the wagon, sitting by the fire, his rifle across his knees, a silent sentinel in the wilderness. The sight filled her with a sense of security she hadn't felt since Michael's death. With that comforting image in mind, she drifted off to sleep beneath the vast Montana sky. The journey continued for 3 more days, each one bringing them closer to Helena and strengthening the bond between them. They fell into a natural routine, rising at dawn, traveling through the day with stops to rest the horses and stretch their legs, making camp at dusk in sheltered locations Kieran knew from previous journeys. During the long hours on the wagon seat, they talked of many things. Kieran spoke of his dreams for his small ranch, the additional land he hoped to acquire, the fine horses he planned to breed. Tabitha shared her own hopes for the future, a small home where she could raise her child, perhaps work as a teacher once the baby was old enough. "You'd make a fine teacher," Kieran observed. "You have a way with words that makes a person want to listen." "My father always said I asked too many questions," Tabitha said with a laugh. "He claimed I wore out the answers. Curiosity is a gift," Kieran said seriously. "It's what drives us forward, makes us better than we were before." It was these moments of unexpected insight that continued to surprise Tabitha about Kieran. Beneath his quiet, reserved exterior was a thoughtful man with a depth of wisdom that belied his young age. On the 3rd night of their journey, as they camped beneath a stand of pine trees, Kieran brought out his harmonica after supper. The sweet, melancholy notes drifted through the darkness, telling stories without words of loneliness and hope, of loss and perseverance. When he finished playing, Tabitha found herself moved to tears. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "Did your mother teach you to play as well as to read?" Kieran nodded, turning the harmonica in his hands. "She believed in beauty, even in the harshest circumstances. Said a life without music and books was barely living at all. She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was," Kieran agreed, his voice gentle with memory. "She would have liked you, I think. You have the same spirit, finding strength in difficult times, refusing to be bowed by circumstance." The comparison touched Tabitha deeply. "I wish I could have met her." "So do I," Kieran said quietly, and there was something in his tone, a wistfulness, perhaps even a longing that made Tabitha's heart beat faster. Their eyes met across the fire, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fall away. There was only this clearing, this fire, this man whose kindness had become so precious to her. Kieran was the first to look away, clearing his throat. "We should reach Helena by midday tomorrow," he said, changing the subject. "The road gets better from here, more traveled, less rough." The reminder of their destination brought Tabitha both relief and a strange sense of regret. She was eager to reach her cousin, to begin rebuilding her life in a place where she might find acceptance. Yet the thought of parting from Kieran filled her with an unexpected sadness. "What will you do after you deliver the horse in Helena?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Head back to Miles City," Kieran replied. "I have more horses to train and winter's coming. Need to make sure everything's secure before the snow sets in." Tabitha nodded, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment his matter-of-fact answer evoked. What had she expected? That he would suggest staying in Helena, that he would declare some deeper feeling for her. "Your cousin's husband works for the territorial government, you said?" Kieran asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Yes, John is a clerk in the land office," Tabitha confirmed. "Why do you ask?" Kieran seemed to choose his next words carefully. "It's just that Helena's growing fast. Lots of opportunities there for someone with skills, even horse trainers." Tabitha's heart leaped at the implication, but she kept her voice steady. "Are you considering a move?" Kieran poked at the fire with a stick, his expression thoughtful. "I've been on my own a long time, Tabitha. Built my life around solitude because it was easier that way, safer. But sometimes I wonder if I've been hiding rather than living." The admission, offered so quietly, struck a chord in Tabitha's heart. She understood what it meant to retreat from life out of fear or pain. "What would you be hiding from?" she asked gently. Kieran was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. Loss, he finally said. Disappointment. The risk of caring too much for things that can be taken away. Tabitha moved around the fire to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. I understand that fear, she said softly. When Michael died, I thought I'd never risk loving again. The pain was too great, the loss too overwhelming. And now, Kieran asked, his voice low. Tabitha took a deep breath. Now I'm beginning to think that closing yourself off from love isn't protection, it's just another kind of loss, one you choose for yourself. Kieran turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. You're a wise woman, Tabitha Foster. Not wise, she demurred. Just learning as I go like everyone else. They sat in silence for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching the flames dance. There was comfort in the proximity, in the shared warmth and understanding that had grown between them in these few short days. Finally, Kieran spoke again, his voice soft in the darkness. I've been thinking about writing to you, after you're settled in Helena, if that would be welcome. Joy bloomed in Tabitha's heart at the simple suggestion. I'd like that very much, she said sincerely. Kieran nodded, a small smile touching his lips. Good, that's good. It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of forever. It was something simpler, yet no less significant, an acknowledgement that whatever had begun between them on this journey was worth pursuing, worth exploring, even if the future remained uncertain. As they prepared for sleep that night, there was a new lightness in Tabitha's heart. Tomorrow would bring Helena and reunion with her cousin, but it would not be the end of her connection with Kieran Ironwood. Something had been set in motion between them, something fragile yet full of promise, like a seedling pushing through soil toward the sun. The final morning of their journey dawned bright and clear. Tabitha woke with a mixture of excitement and apprehension churning in her stomach. By nightfall, she would be with her cousin, beginning this new chapter of her life. But first, there was the matter of finding Sarah in a rapidly growing frontier city. Helena's changed since I was last here, Kieran observed as they approached the outskirts of the city around noon. More buildings, more people, gold and the railroad have brought prosperity. Indeed, Helena appeared to be thriving. Buildings of wood and stone lined the streets, some quite grand by frontier standards. People moved busily about their affairs, miners and merchants, ladies in fashionable dresses, children darting between adults on mysterious errands of their own. Do you know where your cousin lives? Kieran asked as they made their way down the main street. Last street, Tabitha replied. She mentioned it in her letters. Their house is near the end of Last Street with blue shutters. Kieran nodded and guided the wagon through the bustling town. They attracted a few curious glances, a pregnant woman and a cowboy with pack horses in tow, but no one paid them particular attention in a city accustomed to newcomers. Last Street proved to be aptly named, marking the edge of Helena's development before the land gave way to scattered homesteads and eventually wilderness. The houses here were modest but well kept, representing the homes of clerks, shopkeepers, and skilled tradesmen rather than the wealthy mine owners who occupied the grand houses near the center of town. There, Tabitha said suddenly, pointing to a neat white house with blue shutters near the end of the street. That must be it. Kieran brought the wagon to a halt before the house, then helped Tabitha down, his hands strong and steady on her waist. For a moment they stood close together, the journey that had brought them to this point hanging between them like an unfinished conversation. Would you like me to come with you? Kieran offered, to make sure everything is as it should be. Tabitha appreciated his concern but shook her head. I think it's better if I go alone first. Sarah and I have much to catch up on. Kieran nodded in understanding. I'll wait here with the wagon. If everything is well, just wave from the porch and I'll know you're safely home. The word home caught at Tabitha's heart. This wasn't her home, not yet. But with Sarah's help, perhaps it could become one. With a deep breath, Tabitha approached the house and knocked on the door. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of footsteps, and the door swung open to reveal a woman about Tabitha's age with a small child balanced on her hip. Sarah, Tabitha said tentatively. The woman's eyes widened in shock, then recognition and joy. Tabitha, is it really you? Oh my heavens! In an instant, Tabitha was enveloped in a one-armed embrace, Sarah's free arm pulling her close while she balanced her toddler with the other. I can't believe it's you, Sarah exclaimed, drawing back to look at her cousin. Her gaze fell to Tabitha's swollen belly and her expression grew serious. Your letter, I got it last week. Oh, Tabitha, I'm so sorry about Michael. Thank you, Tabitha said, tears welling in her eyes at the genuine compassion in her cousin's voice. I didn't know if my letter had reached you. It did, and we've been worried sick. John's been asking at the stage office every day, hoping you'd arrive. Sarah pulled her inside the house. Come in, you must be exhausted. How did you get here? The stage doesn't come in until tomorrow. A friend brought me, Tabitha explained, then remembered Kieran waiting by the wagon. He's outside now. I should let him know I'm safely with you. She stepped back onto the porch and waved to Kieran, who had remained by the wagon, watching the house with a vigilant expression. When he saw her wave, he visibly relaxed, offering a small nod of acknowledgement. Sarah appeared beside Tabitha, shifting her young son to her other hip. Is that your friend? Invite him in for a meal at least. Anyone who brought you safely to us deserves our thanks. Tabitha hesitated, suddenly reluctant to share Kieran with others, even her beloved cousin. These past days on the trail had been a world unto themselves, a private journey that had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. But Sarah was right. Kieran deserved their gratitude. She waved him over, and after a moment's hesitation, Kieran secured the horses and approached the house, removing his hat as he climbed the steps to the porch. Sarah, this is Kieran Ironwood, Tabitha introduced him. He took me in when no one else in Miles City would and brought me all the way to Helena out of sheer kindness. Mr. Ironwood, Sarah said warmly, extending her free hand, we are in your debt. Please come inside and share our meal. My husband will be home soon, and he'll want to thank you himself. Kieran accepted the invitation with quiet grace, though Tabitha could sense his discomfort at being the center of attention. Inside the modest but comfortable home, Sarah insisted on feeding them both, chattering all the while about the children, John's work, and the community they had built in Helena. You'll stay with us, of course, Sarah told Tabitha as she served up bowls of hearty stew. We don't have much room, but there's a small bedroom off the kitchen that will be perfect for you and the baby when it comes. Tabitha felt a weight lift from her shoulders at her cousin's unhesitating welcome. I don't want to be a burden, Sarah. Once the baby is born, I'll find work. Nonsense, Sarah dismissed the idea with a wave of her hand. Family helps family, that's all there is to it. Throughout the meal, Tabitha was acutely aware of Kieran's quiet presence at the table. He answered Sarah's questions politely, but volunteered little, his natural reserve reasserting itself in this unfamiliar social situation. When John Carlson arrived home, there was another round of introductions and expressions of gratitude. John, a serious but kind-faced man in his early 30s, was as welcoming as his wife. Mr. Ironwood, I can't thank you enough for bringing Tabitha safely to us, he said, shaking Kieran's hand firmly. In this country, a man's worth is measured by his actions, and yours speak volumes about your character. Kieran accepted the praise with quiet dignity. Anyone would have done the same. No, Tabitha said firmly, echoing her words from days earlier. They wouldn't have, and we both know it. Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the unique bond they had formed, of the understanding that had grown between them during their journey. As the evening wore on, Sarah showed Tabitha to the small bedroom that would be hers, a cozy space with a narrow bed and a window overlooking a small garden. While the children were put to bed, John engaged Kieran in conversation about his horse business, showing genuine interest in the cowboy's expertise. Finally, as night fell, Kieran announced that he should be going. I need to deliver this horse to Mr. Bennett before nightfall, he explained. And find lodging for myself. You're welcome to our barn, John offered. It's not much, but it's dry and warm enough. That's kind of you, Kieran said, but I wouldn't impose further. There's a boarding house near the livery that will do fine for tonight. As he prepared to leave, Tabitha followed him onto the porch, leaving Sarah and John tactfully inside. The night was cool but clear, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. So, Kieran said softly, you're home safe, as promised. Thanks to you, Tabitha replied. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness, Kieran, he shook his head. There's nothing to repay, I'm glad I could help. A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words and emotions neither was quite ready to voice. "When will you return to Miles City?" Tabitha finally asked. "Tomorrow or the day after," Kieran replied. "Depends on how quickly I can conclude my business here." Tabitha nodded, trying to hide the disappointment his answer evoked. Will you come say goodbye before you go?" Kieran's expression softened. "Of course." Another silence, another moment of words unsaid. Then Kieran reached out and gently took her hand, his touch sending a warmth through Tabitha that had nothing to do with the mild evening. "I meant what I said about writing to you," he said quietly, "if that's still welcome." "It is," Tabitha assured him, her heart quickening at his touch. "Very much so," Kieran nodded, seemingly reassured. "Then this isn't goodbye, just until we meet again." "Until we meet again," Tabitha echoed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand as Sarah called from inside the house. With a final nod, Kieran replaced his hat and headed down the steps toward the waiting wagon. Tabitha watched him go, a mixture of emotions swirling within her: gratitude, affection, and something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. As she turned to rejoin her family inside, Tabitha placed a hand on her belly, feeling the baby stir beneath her touch. "We're going to be all right," she whispered, to herself as much as to her unborn child. "Thanks to him, we have a chance at a new beginning." The next morning brought a sense of disorientation as Tabitha woke in a strange bed, momentarily forgetting where she was. The sounds of a household stirring children's voices, the clatter of dishes, Sarah's gentle humming reminded her that she had reached safety at last. After breakfast, while Sarah took the children to visit a neighbor, Tabitha sat with John at the kitchen table, discussing her situation more frankly than had been possible the night before. "I want you to know that I don't intend to be a permanent burden," she said earnestly. "Once the baby is born and old enough, I plan to find work. I'm good with numbers and can write a fair hand." John regarded her with kind eyes. "Your family, Tabitha, not a burden, but I understand your desire for independence. As it happens, there may be an opportunity at the land office. Our clerk who handles the records is leaving to try his luck in California. The position requires someone trustworthy and meticulous." Hope flared in Tabitha's heart. "Do you think they would consider a woman for such a position?" "Times are changing," John said thoughtfully. "And out here in the territories, practicality often trumps convention. I can speak to my superior about it." Tabitha felt a rush of gratitude for this man who had welcomed her so readily into his home and was now offering her a path to self-sufficiency. "Thank you, John. That would mean the world to me." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. John rose to answer it, and Tabitha heard the low rumble of a familiar voice that made her heart skip a beat. Kieran entered the kitchen, hat in hand, looking somehow both out of place and perfectly right in this domestic setting. "Good morning," he greeted them. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," John assured him. "Sarah's out with the children, but she'll be sorry she missed you." "Actually, I came to speak with you both," Kieran said, an unusual nervousness evident in his manner. "And with Tabitha, of course." Intrigued, Tabitha gestured for him to join them at the table. Kieran sat, turning his hat in his hands for a moment before speaking. "I've been thinking," he began slowly, "about my plans, about Miles City and Helena." Something in his tone made Tabitha's pulse quicken. "And," she prompted gently when he fell silent. Kieran looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "I've decided to stay in Helena, at least for a while." Joy bloomed in Tabitha's heart, but she kept her voice measured. "What about your ranch, your horses?" "I've arranged for a neighbor to look after things until spring," Kieran explained, "and I've spoken with Mr. Bennett, the man I delivered the horse to. He owns land outside Helena and is looking for someone to manage his stables and train his horses. He's offered me the position." "That's wonderful news," John said, glancing between Kieran and Tabitha with understanding in his eyes. "Helena is growing rapidly. A man with your skills will do well here." "It's a good opportunity," Kieran agreed, though his eyes never left Tabitha's face as if seeking her reaction. "I'm glad you're staying," she said softly, allowing some of her happiness to show in her smile. A look of relief crossed Kieran's features. "Mr. Bennett has a small cabin on his property that comes with the position. It's nothing fancy, but it's solid and private." John cleared his throat, rising from the table. "I should get to the office. Tabitha, we'll continue our discussion about that position later." After John's departure, Tabitha and Kieran sat in silence for a moment, the significance of his decision hanging between them. "Is this truly what you want?" Tabitha finally asked. "To leave your home in Miles City," Kieran's expression was earnest. "Miles City was where I lived, but I'm not sure it was ever truly home. These past days with you, they've made me reconsider what matters most to me." "And what is that?" Tabitha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Connection," Kieran said simply. "The chance to be part of something larger than myself. I've been alone a long time, Tabitha. I told myself it was by choice, but the truth is I was afraid to risk caring too much, afraid to build something that could be taken away. And now." Kieran reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Now I'm more afraid of missing what might be possible, of walking away from something that feels right." The touch of his hand, warm and strong around hers, sent a current of emotion through Tabitha. "I feel it too," she admitted. "This connection between us, but Kieran, I'm still grieving for Michael, and with the baby coming, everything is complicated." "I know," Kieran said gently. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments, just the chance to remain in your life, to see where this path might lead in its own time." His understanding, his willingness to give her the space she needed while still making clear his own feelings, touched Tabitha deeply. In Michael, she had found security and steady affection. With Kieran, she sensed the possibility of something different but equally precious, a partnership founded on mutual respect and a shared understanding of life's hardships and joys. "I'd like that," she said, squeezing his hand. "Very much." The smile that broke across Kieran's face transformed him, lighting his eyes with a joy that made Tabitha's heart swell. "Then that's settled," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Perhaps Tabitha thought it was simple after all. Not easy, not without challenges, but fundamentally straightforward. Two people choosing to walk forward together, one step at a time, toward whatever future awaited them. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm to Tabitha's life. Sarah and John welcomed her fully into their home and family, the children 5-year-old Emma and 2-year-old David quickly accepting her as a beloved aunt. John spoke to his superior at the land office, and to Tabitha's surprise and delight, she was offered the position of records clerk, to begin after the baby was born. The salary would be modest, but sufficient to allow her to contribute to the household expenses, and eventually, perhaps, establish a place of her own. Kieran settled into his new position on Mr. Bennett's ranch, proving himself so valuable that within a month, his employer had increased his wages and responsibilities. The cabin that came with the position, while small, was well built and situated in a picturesque spot overlooking a small stream. He visited the Carlson home regularly, always bringing small gifts for the children and sometimes flowers for Tabitha, wildflowers gathered from the hills, or as winter approached, arrangements purchased from the florist in town. These gestures, simple yet thoughtful, spoke volumes about the man he was. Their courtship, for that was what it had become, though neither had put a name to it, yet progressed with gentle care. Kieran respected Tabitha's need to honor Michael's memory and prepare for the baby's arrival. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, content to build their relationship slowly, on the solid foundation of friendship and mutual respect that had begun on the journey from Miles City. As Tabitha's pregnancy advanced, Kieran's solicitude increased. He insisted on accompanying her on walks, carrying packages when she shopped, and ensuring she had everything she needed for comfort. His concern was touching rather than stifling, rooted in genuine care rather than a desire to control. December arrived with a blanket of snow that transformed Helena into a winter wonderland. Christmas was approaching, and the Carlson home buzzed with preparations, baking, decorating, wrapping simple gifts for the children. One evening, as Tabitha sat by the fire sewing a tiny gown for the baby, Kieran arrived with a small pine tree strapped to his saddle. "I thought the children might enjoy decorating it," he explained as John helped him bring it inside. "And it smells like Christmas." Emma and David were ecstatic, dancing around the tree as their father secured it in a bucket of sand. Sarah brought out the few precious ornaments they had carried west from their eastern home, supplemented by decorations the children had made from paper and pine cones. As the family decorated the tree, Tabitha watched Kieran lift little David to place a star at the top, his strong hands gentle with the child, his face alight with shared joy. The scene stirred something deep within her, a vision of future Christmases, of a family that might include both of them, of a love built on choice rather than circumstance. Later, when the children were in bed and Sarah and John had tactfully retired to their room, Tabitha and Kieran sat alone by the fire, the decorated tree glowing softly in the corner. "Thank you for the tree," Tabitha said, her hands resting on her belly where the baby was particularly active. "It's brought such joy to the house." Kieran smiled, his face softened by the firelight. "I'm glad. Christmas should be a time of joy, especially for children. Did you have happy Christmases as a child?" Tabitha asked, realizing how little she knew of his early years before the tragedies that had shaped him. "Some," Kieran replied, his expression thoughtful. "Before my father died, my mother always made sure there was something special, even when money was tight. A book, a carved toy, once a harmonica." He touched the pocket where he kept the instrument. "After he was gone, things were harder, but she still tried. She believed in celebrating what you have, not mourning what you've lost." "A wise woman," Tabitha observed. "Like mother, like son," Kieran said with a small smile. "You taught me that too, you know. When I found you that night in Miles City, you had every reason to despair. But instead, you held your head high, determined to build something new for yourself and your child." The baby kicked strongly as if responding to Kieran's words. Tabitha laughed softly. "Someone agrees with you," she said, placing her hand over the movement. Kieran hesitated, then asked, "May I?" At Tabitha's nod, he moved to sit beside her on the sofa, placing his hand gently on her rounded belly. The baby kicked again, more forcefully this time, and Kieran's face lit with wonder. "Strong," he murmured. "Like their mother." The intimacy of the moment, his hand on her belly, the shared wonder at the life growing within her, created a closeness that transcended physical proximity. In that quiet moment by the fire, with the scent of pine filling the room and the snow falling softly outside, Tabitha realized that she had fallen in love with Kieran Ironwood. The recognition didn't come as a shock or revelation, but rather as an acknowledgement of something that had been growing steadily within her heart since those days on the trail. It wasn't the same as what she had felt for Michael, that first, youthful love built on shared history and the comfort of the familiar. This was different, a love born of adversity and kindness, of seeing and being seen at her most vulnerable, of respect earned through actions rather than words. "Kieran," she said softly, covering his hand with hers where it rested on her belly, "I want you to know how much you've come to mean to me, how grateful I am, not just for what you did in Miles City, but for who you are, for staying." Kieran's eyes, when they met hers, were filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. "Tabitha," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I've never been good with words, but I need you to know that meeting you, helping you, it changed something in me, woke something I thought was long dead." He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since I saw you standing in the snow that night, refusing to be beaten by circumstance, and I'll wait as long as you need for you to be ready to hear that, to feel it in return if you ever do." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at the raw honesty of his declaration. "Oh, Kieran," she whispered, "I do feel it. I love you too. It happened so gradually I barely noticed until it was already the most certain thing in my heart." Joy transformed Kieran's face, making him look younger, unburdened. Gently, he cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "May I kiss you, Tabitha Foster?" In answer, she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle yet profound, a promise exchanged without words. When they drew apart, Tabitha rested her forehead against his, overwhelmed by the emotions coursing through her. "I never thought I could feel this way again," she admitted. "After Michael, I believed that part of me was gone forever." "Love isn't diminished by loving again," Kieran said softly. "Your heart doesn't have a limited capacity. It grows to encompass more." The wisdom of his words touched Tabitha deeply. "You sound very sure for a man who claimed to be hiding from connection," she teased gently. Kieran smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I had a good teacher," he replied. "A remarkable woman who showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly vigorous kick, making them both laugh. "I think someone is expressing an opinion," Tabitha said. "A strong-willed child," Kieran observed, "like their mother." "And perhaps," Tabitha added softly, "like the man who might in time become their father in all the ways that truly matter." Kieran's expression grew serious at her words. "I would consider it the greatest honor of my life," he said solemnly, "to help you raise this child, to be a father to them if you'll allow it." The sincerity in his voice brought fresh tears to Tabitha's eyes. "Michael will always be their father by blood," she said. "But a child can never have too much love, and I can think of no better man to guide them through life than you, Kieran Ironwood." Their second kiss was deeper, sealed with the weight of promises made and a future envisioned together. When they finally parted, it was with reluctance tempered by the knowledge that they had all the time they needed to build something lasting and true. As January's bitter cold gave way to February's slightly less bitter cold, Tabitha's time grew near. The baby, according to the midwife Sarah had engaged, was positioned well and of good size. Everything pointed to a straightforward birth, though Tabitha couldn't help but feel apprehensive as the day approached. Kieran's visits increased in frequency as her confinement neared. He had taken to bringing supplies for the baby a cradle he had crafted himself from pine, soft blankets purchased from the general store, a silver rattle that must have cost him a week's wages. "You don't need to do all this," Tabitha protested when he presented the rattle. "The baby won't care about silver rattles for quite some time." "I know," Kieran acknowledged with a slightly sheepish smile, "but I care. I want this child to have beautiful things, things worthy of them, things I never had." The admission touched Tabitha deeply. Kieran rarely spoke of his own deprived childhood, but she knew from bits and pieces he had shared that it had been a life of hardship after his father's death. "What this baby needs most is love," she said gently, "and that they will have in abundance." Kieran nodded, his expression softening as he placed a hand on her belly. "That they will." The baby arrived on a cold but clear February morning after a night of labor that tested Tabitha's endurance to its limits. Sarah and the midwife attended her, offering comfort and encouragement through the long hours. Kieran, banished to the kitchen with John and the children, paced the small space like a caged lion, deaf to John's assurances that childbirth, while difficult, was a natural process that women had been managing since the beginning of time. When the first cry of the newborn finally pierced the air, Kieran froze mid-stride, his face a study in conflicting emotions: relief, joy, and a touch of terror at the reality of what was happening. The midwife emerged from the bedroom some time later, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Ironwood," she said with a knowing smile, "there's someone who'd like to meet you." Kieran entered the bedroom with the reverence of a man approaching a shrine. Tabitha lay propped up on pillows, tired but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "Kieran," she said softly, "come meet your son." "Son," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Tabitha nodded, carefully shifting the blanket to reveal a tiny face with a shock of dark hair. "Michael James Foster," she said, "named for his father and for my father." Kieran approached the bed cautiously, as if afraid his presence might somehow disturb the perfect tableau before him. "He's beautiful," he breathed, gazing down at the infant. "Perfect. Would you like to hold him?" Tabitha asked. Kieran hesitated, looking down at his large, work-roughened hands. "I don't know how. I might hurt him." "You won't," Tabitha assured him. "Sit here beside me." With infinite care, she transferred the tiny bundle into Kieran's arms, adjusting his hold to support the baby's head. The contrast between the large, strong man and the tiny newborn he held with such gentle reverence brought tears to her eyes. Kieran stared down at the child, wonder etched on his features. "Hello, Michael," he said softly. "I'm Kieran. And I promise you this, you will never want for anything I can provide. Not food, not shelter, not love, especially not love." The simple vow, spoken with such heartfelt sincerity, confirmed what Tabitha already knew in her heart, that Kieran Ironwood would be a wonderful father to her child, a partner she could trust with her future, a man worthy of the love that had blossomed between them against all odds. "I love you," she said, reaching out to touch his arm. "Both of you. Kieran looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "And I love you, Tabitha Foster, more than I ever thought possible." The baby stirred in his arms, tiny fists waving in the air. Kieran carefully handed him back to Tabitha, watching with tender amazement as she settled the child at her breast. "Tabitha," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "I know this might seem rushed or poorly timed, but I need to ask you something." She looked up, sensing the weight of his words. "Yes," Kieran took her free hand in his touch gentle but firm. "When you're recovered, when you feel ready, would you consider becoming my wife, allowing me the honor of being a father to Michael and a husband to you?" Though the question wasn't entirely unexpected, Tabitha found herself momentarily speechless at the emotion behind it. In Kieran's eyes, she could see not just love, but a depth of commitment that transcended ordinary affection, a promise to stand beside her through whatever life might bring. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I would consider it the greatest blessing of my life to be your wife, Kieran Ironwood." Joy transformed his face, erasing the last traces of the solitary, guarded man she had first met on that snowy night in Miles City. He leaned forward and kissed her with infinite tenderness, mindful of the baby between them. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips, "for giving me a family, for showing me that life doesn't end with loss, that new beginnings are always possible if we have the courage to embrace them." As baby Michael made his displeasure at being slightly squished known with a tiny wail, they both laughed, the sound mingling with the infant's cries to create the first melody of their new life together, a family born not of blood, but of choice, of kindness freely given and gratefully received, of love that had found its way through grief and solitude to something beautiful and enduring. Spring came to Montana territory with its usual capriciousness, days of sunshine and gentle breezes interspersed with sudden snowstorms and freezing rain. By April, however, the worst of winter had passed, and Helena began to shake off its snowy mantle, revealing the first tentative green shoots of the season. Tabitha and Michael had thrived in the months since his birth. The baby grew strong and healthy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's expressive eyes. Tabitha, too, had blossomed, regaining her strength and beginning her work at the land office 3 days a week, with Sarah caring for Michael during those hours. Kieran, true to his word, had proven himself a devoted father-to-be. He visited daily, often taking the baby for walks bundled against the spring chill, singing softly to him or simply holding him while Tabitha rested. The bond between man and child grew stronger each day, a testament to Kieran's natural capacity for love and nurturing that he himself had once doubted. As May approached, bringing with it warmer days and the promise of summer, preparations for the wedding began in earnest. It would be a simple ceremony, held in the small church where Sarah and John worshipped, followed by a celebration at their home. Tabitha would wear a dress of pale blue silk that Sarah had helped her sew, with flowers from Helena's newly opened greenhouse in her hair. Kieran, for his part, had thrown himself into preparations for their life together with characteristic thoroughness. The cabin on Mr. Bennett's property, while comfortable for a bachelor, was too small for a family. With his employer's blessing, Kieran had begun construction on a larger home nearby, a simple but sturdy structure with 3 bedrooms, a generous kitchen, and a covered porch where they could sit on summer evenings, watching the sunset over the mountains. "It won't be ready by the wedding," he apologized to Tabitha as they stood together on the partially completed porch, baby Michael sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. "But by midsummer, it should be finished enough for us to move in." "It's perfect," Tabitha assured him, taking in the beautiful setting, the stream winding through the property, the distant mountains, the open sky that seemed to go on forever. "More than I ever dreamed of having again." Kieran's arms slipped around her waist, drawing her and the baby close. "You deserve every happiness, Tabitha, you and Michael both." The tenderness in his voice still had the power to make her heart skip a beat. "We found it," she said softly. "With you." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, a perfect late May morning. Sarah helped Tabitha dress, arranging her hair with wildflowers and making last-minute adjustments to her gown. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Kieran won't be able to take his eyes off you." Tabitha smiled, smoothing the silk of her dress with trembling hands. I can hardly believe this is happening. A year ago I thought my life was over, and now you're beginning again," Sarah finished for her, squeezing her hands. "With a good man who loves you and that beautiful baby boy." Baby Michael, as if sensing he was being discussed, chose that moment to wake from his nap, announcing his hunger with insistent cries. Tabitha took him from his cradle, settling in a chair to nurse him one last time before the ceremony. As she looked down at her son's face, so trusting and perfect, Tabitha felt a wave of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. The path had been hard, marked by loss and struggle, but it had led to this moment of profound joy, a new family being formed, a future full of promise. "Your papa would be proud of you," she whispered to the nursing infant. "And Kieran will be the father you deserve, the one who will watch you grow and guide you through life. We're so blessed to have found him." When Michael was fed and changed, dressed in a tiny suit that Sarah had sewn for the occasion, they made their way to the church. John waited to escort Tabitha down the aisle, baby Michael in his mother's arms. Inside the small church, decorated simply with wildflowers and ribbons, Kieran stood at the altar. He had traded his usual cowboy attire for a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaven. But it was his expression, as Tabitha appeared in the doorway, that took her breath away, a look of such love, such wonder, that it seemed to illuminate him from within. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Tabitha and Kieran exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises not just to love and honor each other, but to create a home filled with warmth and acceptance, to raise Michael with wisdom and gentleness, to face life's challenges together with courage and faith. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kieran's kiss was both tender and passionate, a promise of the life they would build together, the love they would share. The celebration afterward was joyous, with friends and neighbors gathering at the Carlson home to wish the newlyweds well. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, children playing in the yard as adults conversed on the porch. Kieran, never one for large gatherings, nevertheless moved through the crowd with a newfound ease, accepting congratulations and introducing his wife with quiet pride. Tabitha watched him with her son in his arms, showing the baby to well-wishers with a father's unmistakable joy, and felt her heart might burst with happiness. Later, as the celebration continued around them, Kieran drew Tabitha away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet corner of the garden where they could speak privately. "Mrs. Ironwood," he said, the name still new and wonderful on his lips. "I have something for you." From his pocket he withdrew a small velvet pouch. "It's not much," he said with characteristic modesty, "but it belongs to you now." Tabitha opened the pouch to find a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. When she pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal 2 empty spaces for portraits. "I thought," Kieran said softly, "one side for Michael and one for any other children we might be blessed with in the years to come." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift, not just the beautiful locket itself, but the future it represented, the family they would build together. "It's perfect," she whispered, allowing him to fasten it around her neck. "Thank you, my husband." The word felt right on her tongue, natural and true. Kieran Ironwood was her husband now, in law and in heart, the man she had chosen to share her life with, to raise her child with, to grow old beside. As if reading her thoughts, Kieran took her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "I want you to know something, Tabitha. I don't take this lightly, being Michael's father, being your husband. I know there will be hard days, challenges we can't foresee, but whatever comes, we face it together. That's my promise to you both." "And mine to you," Tabitha replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Together, whatever comes." They sealed the promise with a kiss, standing in the dappled shade of the garden while the sounds of celebration drifted around them, the beginning of a life neither had imagined possible on that cold night in Miles City, when a pregnant widow was refused shelter everywhere, and a cowboy gave her his bed and slept outside. By August, their new home was complete enough to move in, though Kieran continued to work on finishing touches in the evenings and on Sundays. Tabitha transformed the simple structure into a home with curtains she sewed herself, a vegetable garden she planted behind the house, and flowers that bloomed in profusion along the front path. Michael thrived in the country setting, growing stronger and more curious each day. By his 6th month, he was sitting up, reaching for objects, and responding with delight to the world around him. Kieran was endlessly patient with the baby, talking to him as if he understood every word, taking him on short rides on his gentlest horse, showing him the animals and plants that made up their world. The bond between them was beautiful to witness. Though Michael would never know his birth father, he would grow up secure in the love of the man who had chosen to be his father, who cherished him as his own without reservation or condition. Tabitha continued her work at the land office, earning a reputation for efficiency and accuracy that led to an increase in her responsibilities and wages. The income, combined with Kieran's earnings from the horse training business he was developing alongside his work for Mr. Bennett, allowed them to live comfortably and even set aside savings for the future. That future expanded in unexpected ways when, just before Christmas of 1880, Tabitha discovered she was expecting again. The news filled their home with joy. Michael's first Christmas made even more special by the knowledge that by the next holiday season he would be a big brother. "A sister, I think," Kieran predicted as they sat before the fire on Christmas Eve, Michael asleep in his father's arms. "A little girl with her mother's spirit and beauty." "Or another boy," Tabitha countered with a smile, "to follow in his father's footsteps." Kieran's expression grew thoughtful as he gazed down at the sleeping child. "Either way, this baby will be born into so much love. Not just from us, but from a community that cares for them, a brother who'll watch over them, a future secure in ways I never knew as a child." The depth of feeling in his voice touched Tabitha deeply. For all his quiet strength, Kieran had a tender heart, especially where family was concerned. The boy who had lost so much had grown into a man determined to provide stability and love for those in his care. "We're blessed," she said simply, leaning her head against his shoulder, "in ways I never thought possible after Michael died." Kieran pressed a kiss to her temple. "Life has a way of surprising us," he observed. "Of bringing beauty out of sorrow if we're willing to see it, to embrace it when it comes." It was a wisdom they had both earned through hardship, this understanding that joy and pain were not opposites but companions on life's journey, each giving depth and meaning to the other. The following summer brought the arrival of their daughter, Catherine Sarah Ironwood, born on a warm July morning with her brother watching wide-eyed from Kieran's arms as the midwife placed the tiny bundle in her mother's waiting embrace. "She's perfect," Tabitha whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face as she counted tiny fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of this new life they had created together. "Just like her mother," Kieran agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Hello, Catherine, welcome to our family." 2-year-old Michael leaned forward in his father's arms, peering curiously at the baby. "Sister?" he asked, his vocabulary still limited but growing daily. "Yes, son," Kieran confirmed. "Your little sister, you'll help take care of her, won't you? Be a good big brother." Michael nodded solemnly, reaching out to touch the baby's hand with surprising gentleness. Catherine's tiny fingers closed around his in a grip that seemed to seal a bond between them, a connection that would last a lifetime. As Tabitha watched her children's first meeting, her husband's face alight with pride and love, she felt a sense of completion, of having come full circle from that desperate night in Miles City to this moment of absolute joy. The journey had not been easy. There had been moments of doubt and fear, times when the grief for what she had lost threatened to overshadow the blessings of what she had found. But through it all, Kieran had been her constant, her rock, the man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and offered not pity but respect, not charity but partnership. "What are you thinking?" Kieran asked softly, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how far we've come," Tabitha replied. "About the night we met and everything that's happened since." Kieran's smile was tender as he settled Michael beside her on the bed, the family complete in this quiet moment of togetherness. "That night changed everything for me," he admitted. "Opened a door I thought was closed forever." "For me too," Tabitha said, gazing down at their daughter's peaceful face. "You gave me more than shelter that night, Kieran. You gave me hope when I needed it most, a chance to believe in goodness again." "And you gave me a family," Kieran replied, his voice rough with emotion. "A purpose beyond myself, love I never thought I'd know." As if sensing the significance of the moment, baby Catherine opened her eyes blue like her mother's, but with a shape that hinted at her father's keen gaze, and regarded her parents with a solemn expression that soon gave way to a tiny yawn. "She has your eyes," Kieran observed, touching the baby's cheek with a gentle finger. "And your thoughtfulness," Tabitha added. "Look how carefully she's considering the world." They laughed together, the sound mingling with Michael's excited babble and Catherine's soft coos to create the music of their family, a harmony built from individual notes that together created something beautiful and enduring. Outside, the Montana summer stretched endlessly toward the horizon, the land they had both come to love in full bloom beneath the vast sky. Inside, in the home they had built together, Tabitha and Kieran Ironwood held their children close, grateful for the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. It was not the life either of them had envisioned in their youth. It was something better, a life chosen with open eyes and full hearts, built on a foundation of mutual respect and unwavering love, rich with the promise of all the years to come. And it had begun with a simple act of kindness on a cold winter night, when a pregnant widow was refused shelter everywhere, and a cowboy gave her his bed and slept outside.